Hi there. I'm really grateful to be here with you, grateful that you showed up today and you're keeping a good 2 meter distance apart out there. It's nice to see the spread. I bring you greetings from my church, Open Way, which meets in East Vancouver in the afternoon. And it's even smaller than yours, so there are some strengths to small churches on days like today. And I'm grateful that you're moving ahead with your Pi Day plans without the pie, which is very sad for you. It's the best part of Pi Day, in my opinion. But that you're taking this time to proclaim that you are wanting to be public and intentional and explicit about your affirming policies and postures, despite the fact that there are definitely other pressing issues that we could be talking about today. So, I love the passage that was just read, and I will be commenting a little bit on it later, but I've primarily been invited here to give a version of a talk I prepared about allyship from the perspective of a queer person, yours truly, and also to share thoughts from other LGBTQ folks in my community. My hope in the next 15 minutes is to queer the idea of allyship. In other words, I want to shake it up and kind of turn it inside out and break it out of its box, in case you've never heard queer used as a verb before. That word queer is queerer than you thought. It's multifaceted, and it can sometimes be a bit slippery, even when it's used as a noun. You have to handle it with care. It has baggage and it has beauty, and it can elicit polar opposite reactions within the LGBTQ community, let alone outside that community. Much like the word ally. Ally is almost as slippery and tricky as queer. And I think that can be especially true in Christian LGBTQ contexts. Now, I won't assume that just because you're here in this church, you consider yourself to be an LGBTQ ally. Some of you might be LGBTQ yourselves, though I believe that we need to be allies as well, and I'll say more on that later. But just theoretically, let's say that I met you as you came in the door this morning and you introduced yourself to me as an LGBTQ ally. With that word, you could be implying a lot of different things, and that can set us up for some misunderstanding. And more likely than not, it sets me up for disappointment as a queer person. By ally, you could simply want me to understand that you yourself are not LGBTQ. You might be using it as a way to say that you're straight and cisgender. For your information, cisgender, or cis for short, means that you're not transgender, that your gender identity matches your assigned sex at birth. Some of you may have learned that a long time ago, some of you during the affirm process at this church, and some of you are leaving with a brand new adjective for yourselves today, so congratulations. So by ally, it might just mean I'm straight and cisgender. Or, by ally, you could be trying to tell me that you don't consider yourself to be homophobic or transphobic, that you want to be kind to LGBTQ people and you want them to thrive, even if you yourself may not be sure theologically, whether LGBT people should be in intimate relationships with each other. Or, by ally, you could be indicating that you've got this LGBTQ terminology down. You never stumble over that acronym. You already knew about cisgender and about queer, or I even told you. You know what to say and what not to say to avoid offending people. That's what allyship means to you. Or maybe by saying, I'm an ally, you are referencing a particular belief. You're using it as shorthand to tell me that you hold an affirming theology, like we read this morning, that you affirm same-sex intimate relationships and the participation of people of all gender identities and expressions. The problem is that none of those above meanings of ally hold water in the LGBTQ community at large. For us, allyship isn't simply being straight or cisgender, It's not simply being nice, or knowing terminology, or even holding affirming beliefs. It's far more active and intentional than that. Allies are actively leveraging their privilege, resisting injustice, and advocating for LGBTQ equality in their churches and in society at large. In other words, if you're an ally, we need to see the receipts. Unfortunately, our headings with the word ally don't even end there, because even those who are attempting to be active and intentional in their allyship can make queer folks weary and wary of the term when they perform that allyship with the wrong motivations, or if they succumb to a bunch of pitfalls I'll mention at the end. And then to top it all off, there's some among us with pacifist tendencies, myself included, who don't like how ally is drawn from the terminology of war. There's a theologian who recently passed away named Rachel Held Evans, who I think we've adopted as one of our straight cisgender patron saints. And she didn't resonate with that term for that reason. She wasn't keen on the idea of being primarily united by a common enemy. And I respect that. I didn't even make this connection with the word ally at first because I grew up in a time of relative peace and I never played the board game Risk. But I'm realizing it now. So because of all this accumulated baggage around this word ally, there have been some suggested replacements. Some draw on that same vocabulary of war, but have more of an active, conniving criminality to them. Words like accomplice, or even turncoat, suggesting that their namesakes must betray their own privilege and bear the responsibility, the risks, and the consequences with people on the margins. Other suggested replacements are a bit softer, like advocate or supporter. And still others have ditched all words and simply want to equate allyship with decency, basic human decency. So instead of saying, I'm an ally, I'm just a decent human being. I definitely wouldn't fault you for choosing an alternate term, or even for dropping that word altogether in an attempt to return us to the kind of working relationship we're hoping for. I was chatting with my colleague Jamie, who's a writer, and he told me that he noticed all words tending to drift from their original intended meaning over time. Which got me thinking, maybe instead of replacing the word ally, I could make it my personal project to redefine it, to snatch it back from where it's drifted. So last year, I looked up the original meaning of ally, which is not a new thing for me. I'm kind of a word nerd. My friends call me etymology Beth. But it turns out that ally originated long before World War II, which is where we associate it, or World War I, back in the 13th century. It's from the French word allier, which means to unite, to bind, or tie together, to join in marriage, to make kin. I think those are promising origins. Ally started as this beautiful word, and it started as a verb, to ally. It wasn't even used as a noun until 2 centuries later. So how do we bring out the beauty and kind of strip away some of the baggage around this word ally? I think one way is to reclaim its original verbiness, to stop pretending like it's a noun, a state of being, an identity that we can claim and chisel into our permanent being, or put up like a plaque on our wall forever. So instead of saying, I am an ally, we can say, I'm practicing allyship. Or even, I'm trying to be an ally for LGBTQ people. I'm working on this. Using it that way will hopefully remind us that no matter how much allying we did today, we can't just rest on our laurels and pretend like we've earned the title. We start right back at square one tomorrow. To use an image from Vincent Rousseau, tomorrow, you get a fresh ally card to fill. You're in process. You're on the way to allyship. and there's always more for you to learn and to do. And there's always more for me to learn and to do too, because even though I myself am queer, I'm also practicing allyship. And I hope that any other LGBTQ folks in the room are doing the same. We can't pretend that life is full of allies over here and LGBTQ people over here, right? Let's queer that binary. All of us are called to allyship with oppressed communities that we don't belong to. And almost all of us in this room have benefited from the allyship of other people. I see that there are a lot of women here, and how many of you can think of men in your lives who have practiced allyship toward you and their feminism and promoting your rights? In my case, as a cisgender person, I try to be an ally to transgender and non-binary people. And as a white person, I am fumbling along in my attempts to ally with people of color. And as a settler, I'm trying to figure out how to go beyond land acknowledgements in my practice of allyship toward First Nations people. As an able-bodied person, I try to learn how to advocate for disabled people. And of course, I know people who intersect a lot of these identities. So we can't pick and choose which groups we want to ally with. As Desmond Tutu said, if I diminish you, if I diminish anyone, I diminish myself. I think we can agree that allyship is not as straightforward, pun very much intended there, as we think. It involves the constant self-interrogation of our assumptions and our motives, and keeping our radar active to read the power dynamics in the room so we can make some educated guesses about our best course of action. Because this is about action, right? Ally is a verb. For example, wearing your rainbow ally button in some gathering of conservative Christians might be a fantastic way to instigate conversation and to signal that people can feel safer coming to you if they themselves are queer. But wearing that same rainbow button to a poetry slam on Commercial Drive will likely be perceived as potentially more of an attempt to prove that you are woke and allying. Same action, different context, different dynamics, right? So people who are practicing allyship need to be always asking, what's my motive here? How will this be read? How will it be interpreted? And what does this accomplish? Is this the right context for me to tell a person, a First Nations person, I'm sorry on behalf of all settlers, or would that only center me and my need for absolution in this place? Or this Facebook post that is very transphobic, would that be a good place for me to share what I've learned from my trans friends, my time in my church? Maybe. But at this trans rights rally, should I instead direct this reporter to speak to a trans organizer instead of me, a cisgender person? Probably. Should I remain in this non-affirming circle of friends and try to change them from the inside? Or would that be being complicit? Should I stop hanging out with them to make a statement? Or would that be abandoning my ally duties? Should I ask a queer person how to proceed and what to do? Or would that just burden them? How can I best leverage my privilege, my unearned advantages in this situation? Sometimes there's no right answer. And because of different histories and traumas and needs, sometimes different marginalized individuals will ask different things from allies. And sometimes I think God asks different things of different allies, because God wires us in different ways. And all of this can make you feel like you're set up to be criticized, like you're set up to just get exhausted and frustrated. But of course, it's nowhere near as exhausting and frustrating as actually being part of that oppressed group and having no choice but to engage in that kind of constant analysis. Marginalized people can't opt out of reading the room to see what their next best move might be, so they can have the best chance of communicating, of belonging, in some cases of surviving. So I think it's our calling as people who are working on our allyship to take on some of that complexity alongside marginalized people, to make mistakes, to be teachable, to do better when we know better. It's our calling to walk into the trenches in humility, whether you want to talk about war trenches or garden trenches, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who are not there by choice. It's our calling to do, to ally, to put that into action. And I see Jesus doing this kind of ally work in this conversation with the woman at the well. She was a Gentile. She'd been divorced or abandoned many times, making her so much more marginalized than Jesus, the male Jewish rabbi who had gained some notoriety. Yet he arranged his journey so that he would come in contact with her, even though doing so cost him some of his reputation, even with his disciples, and made him ritually impure. I think it's ironic today that our story is about two people who are not supposed to come into contact with each other for the sake of purity. But Jesus stepped into the woman's comfort zone. Instead of expecting her to come to his turf, he sought to understand her in her own space. And instead of coming in with all of the resources and the answers and the plans, he started by putting himself in need of her, vulnerably asking her for water. I think this was reading the power dynamics of the situation and helping to equalize them even a little bit more. He treated her with dignity. He treated her as someone worthy of having a deep theological conversation with. Then he chose her as the very first to receive this secret, this explicit annunciation that he is the Messiah, and empowered her to be his first missionary to Samaria. And I'm also thinking of a story that happens later with another woman, the Syrophoenician woman, and how Jesus received correction from her about the crumbs from the table, if you remember that story, and showed himself to also be teachable in his allyship. There have been so many people in my life who have followed in Jesus' footsteps and have been wonderful allies for me. One example is a woman who would come to our Camp Out event that ran with my other job, with Generous Space, with LGBTQ people going camping together, where we used composting toilets. And this ally would literally haul our shit to the compost pile every day. Talk about the job nobody else wants to do. One of my favorite allies is a semi-retired, 65-year-old straight guy named Mark, who, when I had this crazy idea of launching a new church, but didn't want to attempt it as a solo pastor, said to me, "I'll co-pastor with you. Let's make this happen together." To those who are practicing allyship in this room, and to this church as a whole, I want to say thank you. Your support and your in-the-trenches solidarity, resisting injustice with the oppressed is crucial. And this is a bit off script, but I was reflecting this morning that allyship is antiviral. Because viruses just want to replicate exact copies of themselves over and over to the detriment of every organism that hosts them. But to celebrate the differences between us, to give and to receive, and to not expect everyone to have to look and act exactly as we do, that's antiviral. So that's a little nugget from my shower this morning. So let's keep exhorting each other to hone our ally game and pull each other away from some common pitfalls, pulling away from the savior and missionary complexes, from our tendency to treat marginalized people like victims and create dependencies, to pull away from the paternalistic trap of thinking that we know better than they do, to avoid seeking what aspect of allyship is trendy or sexy right now, to avoid showing up only in the wake of media-covered emergencies. Let's pull away from our guilt-drivenness, where we risk using the struggles of others for our own therapeutic needs. Let's pull away from our human desire to check boxes and earn badges and rack up wokeness points or or pie for what we're doing. That's really basic human decency. Let's pull away from those things and move toward real allyship, which I think, and it hopefully was evident in what I said today, is basically Christ-likeness. It's self-emptying love. It's not considering our status something to be used to our own advantage, rather making ourselves nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, and becoming obedient to death. Literal death, yes, but also the small deaths of 100 humbling moments. This is allyship. This is being united and tied up together, being kin in this, being sewn into the same fabric and joined in that same spirit-fed stream of living water. Because as wiser people than me have said, our liberation is also bound up together. Thanks for listening.